Welcome to Southwest Desert, where adventure meets the arid beauty of the American Southwest. Join us as we explore the rugged landscapes, uncover hidden historical gems, and dive deep into the rich legends and culture of this iconic region. Subscribe now and hit the bell icon so you don't miss out on the latest desert adventures. Please leave a like or comment. This is very helpful. Let's journey together into the heart of the Southwest Desert. Welcome to Southwest Desert, where today we're diving into one of the most intriguing lost mine stories from California's unforgiving desert, the legend of the lost mule, Shoe Gold. Picture yourself in California's harsh desert landscape, where the chocolate mountains rise like ancient sentinels from the earth. The year is sometime between 1892 and 1916, during the heyday of the American Girl and Hedges mines in the nearby Cargo Muchacho Mountains. These were boom times for gold mining in the region. The American Girl mine operated steadily from 1892 to 1900, and again from 1913 to 1916, while the Hedges mine, later known as Tumco, saw continuous operation from 1892 to 1909, with intermittent activity until 1916. It was during this golden age that a lone prospector was about to stumble upon what could be one of the richest gold discoveries in the American West. But like many tales of lost mines, this one begins with desperation and ends in mystery. Our story takes place in the treacherous terrain surrounding Picacho Peak, about 25 miles north of Yuma, where the Colorado River winds its way through the desert. This isn't your typical desert landscape. It's a maze of volcanic flows, rock-paved mesas, and massive washes that could confuse even the most experienced desert rat. And into this deadly puzzle of nature rode our mysterious prospector, a man whose name has been lost to time. Now, here's where things get interesting. This wasn't just any prospector's journey. Our man was violently ill with dysentery when he was ferried across from Arizona to Picacho. Despite his condition, he was determined to make it to an oasis called Dos Palmas, nearly 90 airline miles away. 4.5 hours into his journey, weakness overtook him. According to Carl Walker of Gold Rock Ranch, who would later become intimately familiar with this story, a sick man traveling by horse and leading a pack mule could have covered no more than 16 miles in that time. Our prospector found himself at a saddle between two hills. Whether they were high or low would later become a point of contention in our tale. As he lay there, struggling to recover, fate decided to play her hand. There, jutting from the earth, was a ledge of rock so rich with gold that it would barely crumble when struck. This wasn't just any gold deposit. This was the stuff of prospectors' dreams. The ore was richer than anything he had ever seen before, with golden streakings clearly visible in the rock. And scattered below the ledge, placer gold, eroded from the mother lode above, glinting dully in the desert sun. But our prospector was too weak even to build a stone discovery monument. In a moment of desperate ingenuity, he did something that would give this lost mine its name. He took off his vest, folded it carefully, and placed it on the ledge. To keep it from blowing away in the desert wind, he weighted it down with a spare mule shoe from his pack animal. It was a makeshift marker, he hoped, that would guide him back to his fortune. Taking a few samples from the ledge and one last look at the terrain to fix it in his mind, he mounted his horse and continued his journey. But fortune had other plans. The prospector made it to the coast, but his illness worsened. He ended up in the Veterans Hospital at Sawtell, where he would spend his final days. But before he passed, he shared his secret with a man named William M. Smith. Now, Smith's exact relationship to our prospector is shrouded in mystery. Some say he was a brother-in-law, others a son-in-law, and some claim there was no relation at all. What we do know is that Smith visited the dying man in the hospital for 2 years, and eventually the prospector gave him something precious, a map showing the route he'd taken that fateful day. "I'll never get back now," the old prospector told Smith. "If you find it, send me just enough to make me comfortable." With those words, our original discoverer fades from history, not even his name remembered by those who would later tell his tale. But this is where our story truly begins to get interesting. William Smith was so convinced of the mine's existence that, in 1927, he bought property at the old Hogue Ferry Landing, at the mouth of Gavilan Wash, about 7 miles above Picacho. He named it the 4S Ranch, and it would become his base of operations for what would turn into a more than 20-year search for the lost gold. Let's paint a picture of this remarkable landscape. Above the old gold camp lies mile after mile of desert mountain wilderness. The area is cut by numerous major washes: White Wash, Bear Gulch, Carrizo, Gavilan, and Julian Para washes, among others. Each of these has yielded placer gold, making the search even more tantalizing and confusing. In those days, there were several possible routes our sick prospector might have taken. There was the river road from Picacho that crossed the mouths of all these washes. There was Hoga's road up Gavilan Wash to Indian Mesa, along which he once trail-herded hogs from his Arizona ranch. And there was the road Julian Para had roughed out from an upper tributary of the Wash that bears his name to mesquite diggings, which he had discovered. Adding to the complexity were the numerous deep-rutted Indian trails leading to watering places and through the easy passes, still used by Indians and Mexican and American miners. Today, most of these routes are gone. The river road lies submerged by backed-up waters of Imperial Dam, and Para's mining road has almost vanished. The Indian trails are broken and weathered and unused. Smith's search became something of a legend in itself. He explored every possible route the sick prospector might have taken, his search area growing wider with each passing year. By 1932, he was focusing on the area between his 4S Ranch and Midway Well, especially in the area where Para Wash heads, east of Imperial Gables. Ed Rochester, who had prospected all of the Picacho country, first heard of the lost mule shoe gold from Smith around 1932. When they discussed it, Smith was concentrating his hunt between the 4S Ranch and Midway Well. Rochester believed that Carrizo, Gavilan, and Para washes were all possible locations for the lost ledge, with Para being the most likely. By 1937, Smith had shifted his attention to the main northern tributary of Para Wash, near the Great Synovia Natural Water Tank. This area held particular promise. According to Clyde Stewart of Picacho, every wash that comes into Para from the north side will pan gold, but Synovia has the most. The old main Indian trail passed right by Synovia tanks, which never go dry. Julian Para Wash, which the old-timers invariably called Houlihan, has 3 chief tributaries: the left with Mona Tank, the center with Willow Spring, and the right with Synovia tanks. Julian Para himself had been placering gold near Synovia Tank 65 years before our story takes place. But some, like Carl Walker, suggest a different possibility altogether. Given that the prospector's destination was specifically Dos Palmas, could he have kept south of the Chocolate Mountains the entire way? He might have traveled on a northwest line, past Midway Well and on until he struck the old Bradshaw or Chuckawalla Trail, then followed it past Canyon Springs to Dos Palmas. Smith's final known search came in the winter of 1949. He stopped at Gold Rock Ranch, where he spent the night talking with the Walkers. That evening, he was more confident than ever. "I know exactly where it is," he insisted. "I'm going right up there and find it tomorrow." He even urged Carl Walker to come with him, promising to fill that box with gold for you, pointing to the old trunk the walkers used as a wood box. But the desert had other plans. The next morning, Smith's car got stuck in the sand of a wash not far from the ranch. He spent the entire day waiting to be rescued. As he prepared to return to the coast, he assured the walkers grimly, "I'll be back." But he never did return, and no one reported hearing from him again. The lost mule shoe gold remains one of those tantalizingly possible lost mine stories. The details are specific enough to be believable, yet vague enough to maintain its mystery. Somewhere out there, between two hills, high or low, there might still be a ledge of gold-rich rock. Perhaps the old vest and mule shoe have long since weathered away, but the gold, if it exists, remains, waiting for someone who knows both what they're looking for and how to survive while looking. As Carl Walker once said, "It's anybody's story now, and anybody's gold." But as our tale reminds us, the desert knows how to guard its secrets. This harsh land has claimed lives before, and will claim them again if given the chance. Perhaps that's the real lesson of the lost mule shoe gold, that sometimes the true value lies not in finding the treasure, but in the wisdom gained from searching for it. A man stumbles through the scorching California desert, his lungs burning with each breath. He knows he's dying. But in his pocket is a secret worth dying for, a crude map and a sample of gold that would be worth over $4,000 in today's money, panned from a single sack of red earth. The year is 1876, and he's just made one of the richest surface gold discoveries in the Colorado desert's history. The catch? Only one other person would ever know the location, and both men would vanish into the desert winds, taking their secrets with them. Welcome to Southwest Desert, where today we're diving into one of the Southwest's most tantalizing lost treasure stories. This isn't your typical tall tale born in a saloon or conjured up around a campfire. This is the story of Slim's lost gold, a mystery anchored in real places, verified by reliable witnesses, and backed by physical evidence that has left seasoned prospectors convinced of its truth. The story begins at Mesquite Diggings, one of the last great gold placer discoveries in the Colorado desert. Nestled at the southern edge of the Chocolate Mountains, just northeast of the Southern Pacific Railroad station of Glamis, these diggings were producing the kind of returns that made men's eyes gleam with fever. The year was 1876, and a prospector named Felisario Parra had just struck it rich, unleashing a mini gold rush that would draw fortune seekers from across the West. Among these prospectors was Tom Clark, but Clark was no ordinary desert rat. He was an educated man, someone who would later help pioneer the Palo Verde Valley and dig its first irrigation canal. In the diggings, Clark was pulling in $80 to $90 in gold each day, equivalent to several $1,000s in modern money. But more important than his success was his reputation. Every person who knew Tom Clark said the same thing. His word was as good as gold itself. It was during this boom time that fate dropped a stranger onto the platform at Glamis Station. History never recorded his real name. He became known simply as Slim, and he arrived with nothing but the clothes on his back and a death sentence in his lungs. Slim was what they called a lunger back then, a tuberculosis patient sent west by doctors who had run out of options. The prescription was simple: desert heat, dry air, and prayer. But Slim wasn't ready to lie down and die. Making his way to Mesquite Diggings, he caught gold fever. That's where he met Tom Clark, and this is where our story takes its first dramatic turn. Clark, flush with his own success and known for his generous heart, did something remarkable. He pulled out two $20 gold pieces, a small fortune in those days, and handed them to this stranger. "These," Clark told him, "will buy you a prospecting outfit and grub to last you quite a while. There are sure to be undiscovered placers left in this big desert, maybe farther up along the chocolates. Sunshine and air and the right amount of work will help you. Go out and see what you can find. With this grub stake, Slim began an epic journey that would become desert legend. He followed the magnificent Chocolate Mountains northwest, making a series of stops that we can still trace today. First was Hyden Well, then Salvation Spring, names that hint at the desert's merciless nature. Eventually, he made it to Chuckawalla Well at the base of the Little Chuckawallas, where his burros found the water so sweet they refused to leave. The journey wasn't easy. At one point, his burros escaped back to Chuckawalla Well, forcing Slim to chase them down, an exertion that would prove fateful. But it was at Tabaseka Tank, near the western tip of the Chocolates, where destiny and tragedy began their final dance. Weakened by his chase after the burros and feeling his illness gaining ground, Slim made a desperate decision. He would try to reach Dos Palmas Oasis, less than 20 miles away and closer to civilization. He chose an old Indian trail that he hoped would provide the most direct route. But here's where the story takes its most extraordinary turn. Somewhere along that trail, while crossing an elevation, Slim sat down to rest. Looking around, he noticed something about the earth. It had a distinctive red color. In that moment, all the stories he'd heard at mesquite diggings came flooding back. The old-timers had told him that gold sometimes occurred in such red earth. Despite his weakened condition, Slim filled a sack with the red earth and somehow managed to load it onto one of his burros. When he finally staggered into Dos Palmas, he found several other prospectors camped there. What happened next would become the stuff of legend. That single sack of red earth yielded $120 in gold, an almost unheard-of concentration. But Slim knew he was dying, in what would prove to be his final days. He drew a crude map of his discovery's location and sent it to Tom Clark along with $40 worth of the gold, repayment for the grub stake he'd been given. When Clark learned of Slim's condition, he immediately set out for Dos Palmas. But he arrived too late. Slim had already passed away and been buried. Among his possessions was another $80 in desert-burned gold from that same red earth, physical proof of his incredible discovery. But the story doesn't end there. It takes an even darker turn. Years later, after Clark had settled in the Palo Verde Valley, his home was broken into and searched 3 separate times. Clark believed the burglars were hunting for Slim's map, leading him to conclude that the dying man must have told other prospectors at Dos Palmas about sending it to him. For decades, Clark kept the secret. He finally shared it in the winter of 1938 with Ed Rochester and Earl Kerr at the old camp of Picasso. Even then, he would only discuss it when they were completely alone, taking nearly 2 weeks of interrupted sessions to tell the complete tale. Then came the final mystery. In 1941, Clark was 84 years old. One warm summer day, he left his home at Quayansebe Point on the Colorado River, boarded a bus in Blythe bound for Los Angeles to visit relatives and friends, and vanished completely. With him disappeared the crude map, the only physical clue to this rich gold deposit somewhere near the old Bradshaw Trail. What makes this story different from other lost mine tales is its precise geography. The gold must lie somewhere between Tabaseka Tank and Dos Palmas Oasis, along an old Indian trail that crosses an elevation with distinctively red earth. All the locations mentioned, Dos Palmas, Tabaseka Tank, Canyon Springs, Coyote Holes, and Chuckawalla Well, were watering places along the historic Bradshaw Trail, mostly near Salt Creek Wash. The Bradshaw Trail itself is a piece of living history, opened in 1862 during the La Paz, Arizona gold rush. While much of it can still be followed today by 4-wheel drive vehicles, Searching for Slim's gold has become complicated by modern restrictions. Much of the area now lies within military gunnery ranges, making systematic exploration challenging at best. But the evidence for this lost bonanza is compelling. Those who knew Tom Clark were unanimous about his character. Al Combs, one of Clark's neighbors at Queen Sabe Point, put it most emphatically. "If old Tom Clark told me anything, I would just lift up one hand and swear it was true." His wife Arlena agreed, simply stating, "He was a truthful old man." Yet the gold remains hidden, protected by the harsh desert environment and modern military restrictions. The area north of the Bradshaw Trail where the gold could be located is relatively narrow, but it's a maze of hills, ridges, canyons, mesas, and washes. Each fold in the earth could hide Slim's discovery. Perhaps that's fitting. The desert has always kept its secrets close, revealing them only to those who respect its harsh rules and unforgiving nature. Somewhere out there, between ancient waterholes and crossing forgotten Indian trails, lies a patch of red earth that once yielded $120 in gold from a single sack. The map may be lost, but the gold remains, waiting for someone to rediscover Slim's final gift to the desert. And who knows? Maybe someday, someone will be walking an old Indian trail between Tabaseca Tank and Dos Palmas, rest on a rise just as Slim did, and notice the distinctive red color of the earth beneath their feet. Until then, it remains one of the desert's most tantalizing mysteries, a story of generosity, hope, and gold, waiting to be rediscovered. If you would like to contribute to my channel, join my Patreon community and discover my art print products on my website in the links provided in my description. Also, if you would like a particular image from my videos, give the timestamp for the image, and I will upload it to my website and Patreon. Thank you. Deep in the heart of California's San Diego County, where the Oriflamme Mountains rise like ancient sentinels against the sky, there's a story that's been whispered around campfires for over a century. It's a tale that begins, as so many Western legends do, with a chance encounter during a drought-stricken summer in 1914. But unlike many tales of lost mines and hidden treasures, this one has something that sets it apart. A once-living witness who saw the gold with his own eyes, held it in his hands, and spent the rest of his life trying to find it again. To understand this story, we first need to understand the land where it took place. The Oriflamme Mountains aren't just another range in California's vast wilderness. They're a place of mystery, their humpbacked ridges rising from the earth like the spine of some ancient beast. Native Americans have long regarded these peaks with a mixture of reverence and fear. Local tribes speak of them in whispers, describing them as gaunt and sinister sentinels standing watch over long-buried secrets. But it's not just their imposing presence that sets these mountains apart. For generations, witnesses have reported strange phenomena in these hills, unexplained lights that dance across the ridges at night, weaving between the peaks before vanishing into the darkness. Some say these are the spirits of Native Americans slaughtered by Spanish conquistadors, forever guarding their ancestral treasures. Others claim they're natural phenomena, like St. Elmo's fire. A few insist there's something else entirely, something that defies explanation. But everyone agrees on one thing: the Oriflamme Mountains are different. The summer of 1914 was particularly brutal in Southern California. The sun had baked the land into submission, turning once verdant pastures into dusty wasteland. In Valley Center, ranchers watched helplessly as their cattle grew thinner by the day. Among these worried ranchers was a man known as Chatty Helm, whose dairy herd was slowly starving. Helm knew he had only one choice: move his cattle to the greener pastures of Imperial Valley, a journey that would take them through some of the most treacherous terrain in Southern California. For this arduous drive, Helm hired two men who couldn't have been more different. The first was Harry Yarnell, a young and eager prospector who had already spent countless hours searching the hills for that one big strike that would make him rich. Yarnell was known throughout the region as a serious prospector, not some greenhorn chasing wild stories, but a man who understood the science and geology of gold deposits. The second man was Julian Cabrias, a quiet mission Indian whose deep knowledge of the back country would prove invaluable for the cattle drive. Cabrias was different from other Native Americans Yarnell had met during his prospecting days. He carried himself with a quiet dignity and spoke perfect English, yet seemed to maintain a connection to the old ways that fascinated the young prospector. The cattle drive began like any other, with the herd moving slowly through the parched landscape. Their first night's camp was made at what is now Lake Henshaw, though back then it was just a spring near a peculiar place called Monkey Hill. The hill had earned its name years earlier when a circus wagon overturned there, releasing its exotic cargo into the California wilderness. It was the kind of place where stories began, and that night, around the campfire, another story would start to unfold. As the flames cast dancing shadows on the faces of the men, Yarnell and Cabrias began to talk. Now, any experienced prospector knows that campfire tales about gold are as common as sand in the desert. The hills of California were full of such stories, tales of lost mines, hidden treasures, and fortunes just waiting to be discovered. Most prospectors had learned to listen to such tales with amusement rather than serious interest. But there was something different about the way Cabrias spoke. He didn't boast or embellish his tales with fantastic details. Instead, he matter-of-factly described gold deposits throughout the region, in the Santa Rosas beyond the Montezuma claims, in the Santa Isabel Hills. He spoke of these places not as legends or mysteries, but as simple facts, places he had seen with his own eyes during his travels through the back country. It was on the third night, in Earthquake Valley, that everything changed. The cattle were unusually restless that evening, moving nervously under a star-filled sky. Even the most experienced cowboys in the group noticed something was different. The animals seemed to sense something in the air, something that made them uneasy. Chatty Helm sent Cabrias out to settle them down, knowing the Indians' quiet way with animals might calm the herd. When Cabrias returned to the campfire, he did something that would change Harry Yarnell's life forever. Without ceremony or dramatic flourish, he simply held out his hand. In his palm lay half a dozen golden nuggets, the largest about the size of a peanut, all of them gleaming in the firelight with that unmistakable warm luster that every prospector dreams of seeing. In that moment, all of Yarnell's carefully cultivated skepticism vanished. These weren't just stories anymore. These were real nuggets, solid proof of Cabrias's claims. The Indian's next words were simple but filled with promise. "I found these like I tell you." Then he offered to show Yarnell where they came from. The two men walked away from the camp, moving through the growing darkness for about 30 minutes. They finally stopped at the mouth of a small draw, one of countless such gullies that cut through the Oriflamme Mountains. In the rainy season, water would rush down this canyon, but now it was dry and barren. Cabrias pointed up the draw and spoke words that would echo through the decades. "It is but a short walk up to the place. The small gold pieces cover the sand. I have heard my people tell of this place many times. There is much gold." Trying to maintain his composure, Yarnell built a small cairn of stones to mark the spot. Nothing too obvious, just enough that he could find it again after completing the cattle drive. As they walked back to camp, Cabrias shared one more piece of information that would later prove significant. He mentioned that another place of much gold existed to the west, over beyond Pine Valley. At the time, Yarnell filed this information away, not knowing how important it would become. But fate, as it often does in tales of lost treasure, had other plans for Harry Yarnell. In El Centro, at the end of the cattle drive, he was offered a job he couldn't refuse, one that would take him north to Riverside. The pay was too good to turn down, but it meant delaying his return to the gold-filled gully. In a moment of weakness, perhaps wanting to share his incredible good fortune, he told another prospector about the cairn in Earthquake Valley. The next morning, that prospector and his burro had vanished into the dawn, leaving Yarnell with a sinking feeling in his stomach. Spring came before Yarnell could return to the valley. The landscape had changed dramatically. Spring thunderstorms had reshaped the terrain, and his carefully placed cairn was nowhere to be found. That night, as he camped in the valley, he witnessed the infamous lights himself. Strange, lambent fireballs racing from ridge to ridge before vanishing into the darkness. Whether they were the ghostly guardians of Native American gold or some natural phenomenon, they added another layer of mystery to his quest. For days, Yarnell crawled through the gullies on his hands and knees, sifting sand between his fingers, searching for any sign of the golden bounty he'd seen in Cabrias's palm. The landscape that had seemed so clear in the firelight that night was now a maze of identical draws and valleys. Every gully looked like it could be the right one, yet none of them yielded even a single flake of gold. The story might have ended there, relegated to the status of just another lost mine tale, but there was one more twist that convinced Yarnell he wasn't chasing a mirage. In the mining town of Banner, where fortunes had been made and lost, he heard about a prospector named George Benton who had just struck it rich. Benton had found a massive boulder shot through with wire gold, worth over $3,000 at the time, a small fortune in 1914. The location of Benton's find? Near Pine Valley, the exact area where Cabrias had mentioned another place of much gold existed. This confirmation of at least part of Cabrias's story convinced Yarnell that the Indian Gully gold was real. Julian Cabrias was never seen again. Like many figures in tales of lost treasure, he simply vanished into history, leaving behind only questions and the memory of those golden nuggets gleaming in the firelight. Some speculated that he had returned to his people, while others wondered if he had met with foul play. A few even suggested that he had been a spirit, sent to test Yarnell in some way. Whatever the truth, his disappearance only added to the mystery of the Indian Gully gold. The years rolled by, but Harry Yarnell never gave up his search. Even as an old man, he continued to prospect in the Oriflamme Mountains. Every time he saw those strange lights dancing across the ridges, he wondered if this would be the night he'd finally rediscover that dusty, narrow wash and walk up to find golden nuggets scattered across the sand. The mystery consumed him, becoming not just a search for gold, but a quest to prove that one magical night hadn't been a dream. Time brought changes to the region. Modern mines were dug in the area, and yes, some gold was found. George Benton's 1,000-pound boulder of gold-shot rock became well documented in local mining records, but the legendary Indian Gully, with its carpet of golden nuggets, remained hidden. Some said the gold had been buried by landslides or washed away by flash floods. Others believed it was still there, protected by whatever force created those mysterious lights in the night sky. The next time you find yourself in San Diego County, look east toward the Oriflamme Mountains. As the sun sets and shadows lengthen across Earthquake Valley, you might catch a glimpse of those mysterious lights dancing across the ridges. And perhaps you'll understand why Harry Yarnell never stopped searching for Julian Cabrias's lost gold. Imagine having so much gold that you wouldn't even bother to weigh it. Need to buy supplies. Just grab a handful of nuggets from the bucket under your kitchen table. Sounds like a fever dream, right? But in the sun-scorched valleys of the American Southwest, there was a time when gold was this plentiful. And somewhere out there, beneath the shifting sands or perhaps at the bottom of the mighty Colorado River, lies what might be California's and Arizona's earliest lost treasure, a fortune in gold that vanished in a single night of flames and bloodshed. Welcome to Southwest Desert, where we uncover forgotten tales of the American Southwest. Today's story has everything: Spanish missionaries, a Native American uprising, buried treasure, and a centuries-old curse. Some say the gold still lies beneath a sacred peak, while others claim you can see the ghost of a murdered priest walking the desert on moonlit nights, seeking revenge. This is the mystery of Mission San Pedro y San Pablo de Bicunar, a tale of greed, violence, and enough gold to make a modern millionaire blush. Let's begin our story in 1886. Two men stand before the crumbling remains of adobe walls. One is Father Zephyrin Engelhardt, a respected Franciscan historian known for his meticulous research. The other is a tall, powerfully built Quechan Indian, though the Europeans called his people the Yuma. They're standing 9 miles northeast of present-day Yuma, Arizona, on the California side of the Colorado River, and they're about to uncover a mystery that would persist for generations. This was the other mission, the Quechan guide says, gesturing to the ruins. Father Engelhardt studies the adobe fragments intently, his mind racing back through a century of history. He knows that in the late fall of 1780, Spanish colonizers had established 2 mission pueblos in this valley, Purísima Concepción and San Pedro y San Pablo de Bicunar. What he doesn't yet know is that he's standing at the heart of what would become one of the Southwest's most enduring treasure mysteries. But to understand this story properly, we need to go back even further, to 1746, when a Jesuit priest named Jacobo Settlemer first explored this region. Though he found no active mines, Settlemer wrote something prophetic. There is no lack of hopes and possibilities of their existence. His own mule drivers had discovered mineral deposits that hinted at greater riches. This report would help spark Spanish interest in colonizing the area, though they couldn't have imagined the tragedy that would unfold. By 1780, the Spanish colonial machine was in full swing. Under a new and untested plan developed by Teodoro de Coa, Comandante General of the Provincias Internas, they established 2 missions along the Colorado River. But this wasn't your typical Spanish mission setup. For the first and only time in Spanish colonial policy in the Southwest, the Franciscan fathers were stripped of their usual powers. They couldn't enforce duties on Indians or Spaniards, nor could they punish or reward them. Instead, the military handled governance and punishment. But here's the twist. There was no fort or presidio. The soldiers lived among the settlers with their families in uniformly sized houses on surveyed town lots. In theory, the Quechan people could have homes among the Spaniards. In practice, well, that's where things started to go wrong. Despite the king's explicit orders, the Spanish settlers began appropriating the best Indian lands. The military, who should have prevented this, instead punished the Quechan when they protested, even putting their leaders in stocks. The Franciscan missionaries, reduced to what they bitterly called mere ornaments, could do nothing but watch as tensions mounted. But there was something else happening beneath the surface, literally. The mission had been built on what would later be recognized as one of the Southwest's richest placer gold deposits, the Potholes. And just across the river, the even richer Laguna placers. Let me paint you a picture of just how rich these placers were. José Alvarado, whose grandfather worked a claim at Laguna in the 1850s, tells an almost unbelievable story. My mother told me that when she was a girl at Laguna, my grandfather had buckets just sitting under the kitchen table, regular water buckets, filled with nuggets and placer gold. When my grandfather bought a sack of flour, he never weighed the gold for it. Just reached in a bucket and got a handful of gold. A handful of gold for a sack of flour. There was that much gold at Laguna. But back to our story. On July 17, 1781, just 8 months after the mission's establishment, violence erupted. The Quechan people rose up against the Spanish colonizers. The mission was put to the torch, and in the ensuing chaos, 4 Franciscan missionaries were killed, including the famous Padre Francisco Garces. Captain Rivera y Moncada and most of the soldiers and settlers met the same fate, though the women and children were spared and later ransomed back to Sonora. Now, here's where our mystery deepens. When Father Engelhardt visited the ruins in 1886, his Quechan guide dropped a bombshell. The Mexicans came back here after it was burned and hunted for the gold, he said. When Engelhardt protested that the Franciscan missionaries had no gold, the guide simply shrugged and repeated, "This is where they came to hunt for the gold." The Quechan people have maintained their version of events through generations. Our ancestors worked the gold for the Padres. The gold became a curse to them, and they rose and killed the Spaniards and threw the gold away. But did they really throw it away? That's where our story takes another fascinating turn. The first documented treasure hunt took place in 1836, led by 2 Americans, Thomas Russell and Peter Weldon. Russell wasn't exactly your typical treasure hunter. Richard Henry Dana, in his famous 2 Years Before the Mast, described him as a desperate loafer who was short, red-haired, round-shouldered, vulgar-looking, and had lost one eye and squinted with the other. Their expedition failed, but, interestingly, the Mexican authorities were convinced enough about the treasure's existence to demand any findings for the national treasury. Over the decades, countless others would search the ruins. William G. Kaiser, who arrived at the Colorado River around 1898, tells of 3 Italian priests who came with an old map made in Paris, searching for one of the mission's corners. But by then, treasure hunters had already torn up the walls so thoroughly that the original corners couldn't be identified. But perhaps the most intriguing account comes from Jose Alvarado, who heard a story that had passed through just 3 generations, originating from a youth who survived the attack on the mission. According to this account, after the uprising, the Quechan took the gold across the river to a prominent peak. There, after a week-long gathering of tribes, they carefully buried it in a rawhide bag, trampling the earth so thoroughly that within weeks, no trace remained. The Quechan people's name for this peak is Viquilcist, and say it's one of their elder statesmen turned to stone. By the early 1900s, the mission site had become a focal point for treasure hunters. Shorty Mills, who worked the placers from 1916 to 1936, found what he believed were the mission's remains, a long, low ridge containing adobe bricks and 2 old fig trees. But nature had the final say. The Great Flood of 1916 washed away most of what remained, and the construction of the All-American Canal in the 1930s erased the last traces of Mission Bicunaire from the landscape. Today, the physical evidence of Mission San Pedro y San Pablo has vanished completely. The adobe walls have crumbled, the fig trees are gone, and the exact location of the mission itself is debated. But somewhere out there, whether beneath the sacred peak of Viquilcist, scattered in the Colorado's waters, or buried beneath the shifting sands, lies a treasure that represents not just gold, but a pivotal moment in American history. What makes this story more than just another lost treasure tale is the undeniable evidence that massive amounts of gold did exist in this region. The Spanish colonists who established the mission came from Sonora, a state renowned for its miners and prospectors. By 1839, Francisco Frejé would write that the sands of the Colorado River are one continuous golden placer. Even Lieutenant R.W.H. Hardy of the British Royal Navy noted in 1828 the persistent reports of gold dust mixed with sand in the region. So what really happened to the gold of Mission Bicunaire? Was it scattered into the mighty Colorado, forever lost to its swirling waters? Does it lie buried beneath the watchful gaze of Viquilcist Peak? Or perhaps it still rests somewhere beneath the vanished foundations of the mission itself, waiting to be discovered by some fortunate soul who can unlock the secrets of this centuries-old mystery. What we do know is this. Somewhere in the sun-baked earth around Yuma lies what might be California's earliest lost treasure. The first, the best, the biggest nuggets picked up from those incredible Colorado River placers. It's a reminder of a time when gold was so plentiful that men measured it by the handful, and of a violent clash between two cultures that would forever change the course of history in the American Southwest. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Southwest Desert. If you enjoyed this story of lost treasure and historical intrigue, join us next time for another fascinating tale from America's Southwest past. Check out my large Southwest catalog of videos and playlists on historical tales, legends, lost gold tales, and adult bedtime stories. Happy trails! Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more great content. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. See you in the next video.